My jealous stepsister falsely claimed my fiancé wanted to elope with her on our wedding day. I informed her husband of her actions, leading to their divorce. Hello, everyone. I've been sitting on this story for a long time, unsure if I should ever put it out there. Part of me didn't want to air my family's dirty laundry, and honestly, I kept hoping things would settle down on their own. But at this point, I think I've made my peace with it, and I feel more than happy to share this absolute roller coaster of a story, anonymously, of course. If nothing else, maybe someone out there will relate, or at least get some entertainment out of the chaos that unfolded in my life. I, F28, and my stepsister Maddie, F27, have always been close, practically inseparable since childhood. Our parents got married when we were around 6 or 7, blending our families, and from that point on, we were just there for each other. Now, don't get me wrong, we weren't always on the same page. Like any siblings, we had our share of disagreements, from petty fights over borrowed clothes to bigger arguments about personal choices or boundaries. There were times when we'd go days without speaking, each convinced the other was being unreasonable. But no matter how annoyed or frustrated we got, we always found our way back to each other. She was the kind of person I could call at any hour, whether I needed advice, a favor, or just someone to vent to. We supported each other through everything: school stress, family issues, breakups, you name it. If one of us was struggling, the other was there, no questions asked. At the end of the day, she was my family in every way that mattered. One day, everything changed. A new guy, Jake, transferred to our class, and from the moment he walked in, he caught both of our attention. He was charming, funny, and just had that effortless confidence that made him instantly likable. And, as you can probably guess, both Maddie and I developed feelings for him. At first, it wasn't a big deal. We'd casually talk about how cute he was, joke about who had a better chance, and even playfully tease each other. But as time went on, things started to shift. What started as harmless fun quickly turned into something more serious. We both wanted to get closer to him, and before we even realized it, our sisterly bond turned into a rivalry. After some time passed, we both realized that our growing rivalry over Jake was starting to affect our relationship. The playful teasing had turned into subtle competition: who he laughed with more, who he sat next to in class, who he texted back faster. It was getting to the point where it felt like every interaction with him was some kind of unspoken contest, and honestly, it was exhausting. So, in an attempt to keep things from getting out of hand, we sat down and made a mutual agreement. Neither of us would make a move on Jake. No flirting, no scheming, no trying to win him over. If Jake was interested in one of us, it had to be his decision, not something we influenced. That way, we could keep things fair and, more importantly, avoid letting a crush ruin our bond. However, despite our agreement, Maddie broke the deal. One day, she decided to take matters into her own hands and confessed her feelings to Jake. I didn't know about it at the time. She never told me what happened, but I later found out that he rejected her. From what I heard, he let her down gently, saying he didn't feel the same way and didn't want to lead her on. I didn't think much of it at first because, as far as I knew, our agreement still stood. I figured we had both moved on, and that was the end of it. But then, a few months later, something unexpected happened. Jake told me he had feelings for me. I was caught off guard. After everything that had happened, I hadn't even considered the possibility that he would choose me, but after some time, I realized I felt the same way. So, after a lot of thinking, and a little hesitation, Jake and I started dating. After all, Maddie broke the deal first. Of course, Maddie wasn't okay with this. The moment she found out that Jake and I had started dating, things between us completely fell apart. She was furious, hurt, and completely shut me out. She felt betrayed, even though Jake had made his choice on his own and I hadn't done anything behind her back. From her perspective, I had broken our unspoken sister code, even though she was the one who had gone against our agreement first. At first, I tried to talk to her, to explain that I hadn't planned for this to happen and that I never wanted to hurt her. But she wasn't interested in listening. She refused to even look at me, and overnight, our relationship as sisters went from inseparable to non-existent. It wasn't just awkward at home, it was painfully obvious at school too. We went from sitting together at lunch and walking to class side by side to acting like complete strangers. She avoided me in the hallways, stopped inviting me to hang out with our mutual friends, and even made it clear to everyone around us that she wanted nothing to do with me. I felt guilty. I didn't want to lose Maddie over this, and I wished she could see that I wasn't trying to hurt her. But at the same time, I was happier than ever with Jake. Jake and I became that classic high school sweetheart couple, going to football games together, spending weekends watching movies, and passing cute notes to each other during class. He made me feel loved, valued, and genuinely happy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was where I was meant to be. I kept hoping that eventually Maddie would get over it, that we'd find our way back to each other. After all, we were sisters. Almost 10 years went by. Life moved on, and so did we. The tension that once defined our relationship slowly faded with time. We weren't close like we used to be, but we had reached a point where we could at least be civil to each other. At family gatherings, we'd exchange small talk, laugh at inside jokes from our childhood, and even sit next to each other without any awkwardness. However, there was an unspoken rule between us. We never mentioned Jake. It wasn't something we agreed on out loud, but it was clear that neither of us wanted to revisit the past. Whenever his name came up in other conversations, we'd both silently avoid eye contact and quickly steer the topic in another direction. It was as if we had silently erased that entire chapter of our lives from existence. By then, Maddie had been happily married for a couple of years. She had moved on, built a life with someone else, and from the outside, it truly seemed like the conflict was over. There was no bitterness, no resentment, just two sisters who had grown past a messy history and learned to coexist. Then Jake and I finally decided to have our wedding. He had proposed to me a while ago, and of course I said yes. We had been together for years, and it felt like the natural next step. But we didn't rush into wedding planning right away. Instead, we focused on saving money to have the kind of celebration we truly wanted. It wasn't just about throwing a big party. We wanted it to be special, something that reflected our journey together, from being high school sweethearts to building a life side by side. After years of hard work, we finally reached the point where we could start making it happen. On the morning of my wedding, I was sitting in the bridal suite, getting my hair and makeup done, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, a day I had been looking forward to for so long. Then, Maddie walked in. At first, I thought she was just coming to wish me well, or maybe share a rare sentimental moment between sisters, but what she said completely blindsided me. She told me that Jake had called her, that he wanted to elope with her. I just stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. She spoke so calmly, so matter-of-factly, as if she wasn't dropping a bombshell on my wedding day. She told me that Jake had apparently reached out to her and confessed that he was having second thoughts and that he wanted to run away with her instead. I felt like my brain couldn't keep up with what she was saying. She went on to say that Jake seemed so sure of himself, so confident in his decision, but that she, being the rational one, had rejected him. She claimed that after their conversation, they had both agreed to just forget about the whole situation and move on as if nothing had happened. And then she hit me with the most bizarre part. She told me not to bring it up to him. She insisted that since she had shut him down, there was no point in confronting him, that it would just create unnecessary drama on my big day, that I should just go through with the wedding and pretend like this conversation had never happened. I sat there, my mind spinning. Jake and I had been together for nearly a decade. We had built a life together, planned this wedding together. He had never once given me a reason to doubt him. And yet, here was Maddie, standing in front of me, telling me that he was willing to throw everything away for her. I didn't know what to believe. Was she telling the truth? Was Jake really having second thoughts? Or was this some kind of twisted game? I felt sick to my stomach, my hands shaking as I tried to process everything. I wanted to believe that Maddie was lying, but at the same time, why would she make this up? I had to figure out what was really going on, and I had to do it before I walked down that aisle. Luckily, we still had time before the guests arrived, so I knew I had to get to the bottom of this before walking down the aisle. I took a deep breath, pushed aside my growing frustration, and went to find Jake. I needed to hear his side of the story face to face. If there was even a shred of truth in what Maddie had said, I had to know now. Not later, not after the vows, now. When I finally found him, he was standing with his groomsmen, looking completely relaxed, laughing about something. The moment he saw me, his face lit up, but he quickly noticed my expression and immediately became concerned. I pulled him aside and told him everything. Word for word, I repeated what Maddie had just told me. I watched his face closely, searching for any sign of hesitation or guilt, but the second I finished speaking, all I saw was pure confusion. He looked at me like I had just spoken in another language. It was clear he had no idea what I was talking about. She said you called her and told her you wanted to run away with her, I repeated, feeling ridiculous even saying the words out loud. At that point, Jake laughed, not in a mocking way, but in that shocked, "Is this a joke?" kind of way. But when he realized I was being serious, his face changed. He was genuinely hurt that I even considered this for a second. I have no idea where she got that from. I haven't spoken to Maddie in years outside of family gatherings. Why would I call her? Why would I do this on our wedding day? And in that moment, I knew. I had been with Jake for almost a decade. I knew him. I knew his tells, his expressions, the way he reacted when he was guilty, nervous, or lying. And this was just pure confusion and hurt. Maddie had made the whole thing up. I felt a mix of relief and absolute fury. Relief that Jake hadn't betrayed me, that our relationship was just as strong as I believed it to be. But fury that my own sister had tried to sabotage one of the most important days of my life. What was her goal? Did she want me to cancel the wedding? Did she want to humiliate me? Or was this some last-ditch attempt to get back at me for something that had happened a decade ago? I took a deep breath, still reeling from what had just happened, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. If Maddie wanted to pull something like this, she needed to own up to it. So, I called her husband. The moment he picked up, I asked if he had a moment to talk privately. He sounded a little surprised, probably thinking I was calling about the wedding, but he agreed. And then, I laid it all out for him. I told him exactly what Maddie had said to me, that she claimed Jake had called her, asked to elope, and then told me not to bring it up to him. I explained how, of course, when I confronted Jake, it was obvious that none of it was true. He had no idea what I was talking about. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he sighed and asked if I was serious. I told him yes, and that honestly, at this point, I could only assume that something was still bothering her after all these years. She was happily married. She had moved on. She had a life of her own. And yet, here she was, on my wedding day, trying to plant seeds of doubt and sabotage my relationship. Why? Her husband didn't have an immediate answer, but I could tell he wasn't exactly shocked. He sounded tired, like this wasn't the first time he dealt with something like this. At that moment, I felt two things: validation and disappointment. Validation, because now at least someone else saw what was happening, but disappointment, because deep down, I had really hoped that Maddie had truly moved on. Clearly, she hadn't. Just minutes later, Maddie's phone rang. I didn't know exactly what her husband was saying on the other end, but I didn't have to guess for long. The second she picked up, her face went pale. I watched as her expression shifted from shock to panic. Her voice was low, but I could still make out bits and pieces. She was trying to explain herself, trying to deny or justify what she had done, but whatever her husband was saying, it was serious. And then, I heard the part that made my stomach drop. He told her he wasn't coming to the wedding. More than that, he wanted a divorce. Maddie's whole body tensed. She turned to look at me for a second, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, embarrassment, regret. I had no idea, but she didn't say a word. She just grabbed her things and left. And just like that, she was gone. With the Maddie drama officially over, our wedding went off without a hitch. I walked down the aisle with confidence, knowing I was marrying a man who had always been honest and loyal to me. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was everything I had dreamed of, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free from the shadow of my stepsister's jealousy and resentment. It was a day full of love, laughter, and new beginnings. When my family started noticing Maddie's absence, the questions began. At first, people just assumed she had stepped out for a moment, maybe needed some air. But as time passed and she was still nowhere to be found, the whispers started. Where was Maddie? Why would she leave in the middle of my wedding? Eventually, a few family members approached me directly, asking what had happened. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them the truth. I explained everything. How Maddie had come to me that morning, lied about Jake wanting to run away with her, and told me not to confront him. How when I did talk to Jake, it was clear she had made it all up. And yes, I told them that I had called her husband and let him know what happened. The reaction was mixed. Some family members were clearly shocked, others looked uncomfortable. And then came the inevitable, "You shouldn't have called her husband." They told me I had gone too far, that what happened between me and Maddie should have stayed between us, that even if she did something awful, it wasn't my place to potentially ruin her marriage over it. But at the same time, they understood why I did it. No one was outright defending Maddie's actions, and most of them agreed that what she did was cruel and unnecessary. But some still believed I should have just let it go instead of involving her husband. Honestly, I didn't regret it. Maddie had spent years pretending like she had moved on, only to pull something this manipulative on one of the most important days of my life. If her husband choosing to leave her was the consequence of her actions, that was on her. At the end of the day, my wedding was still beautiful, full of love and happiness, and no matter what anyone thought, I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for myself.